Welcome to week one of Regenerative Leadership. Um, this is the presentation for the PowerPoint content of the week for this first module that it'd be good for you to go through in order to prepare both for your course assignments and then of course for the discussion forum and then the live session on Friday. So if you could watch this before the Friday session, that would certainly be best. And take advantage of going through the materials in the course website, which I'll get to in a minute. So for this first module, we're actually going to go into some of the key principles of sustainability, sustainable development, and regenerative leadership or regeneration, just to differentiate the terms for those who are not, for those of you who are not familiar with them. But first, I'd like to just go over some of the basics of the course as a whole, just to make sure that you're familiar with what the expectations are. And then we can discuss these and hopefully answer any questions you might have about them. So as you can see on the presentation, the idea of the course is that you will walk away with a very good understanding of the terms sustainability, sustainable development, regeneration, and more importantly, how you can actually translate these principles into your own work, into the actual practice. Whether you're in the for-profit or non-profit sector, whether you are in a non-governmental organization, an NGO, in a school, in education, in agriculture, industry, finance, wherever you might find yourself, as you will see, regenerative leadership can be correlated to effective leadership for sustainability or regeneration in any field, in any human activity, as it is based on my own research into the most effective leaders of those organizations. They have been able to actually lead towards greater and greater degrees of sustainability or regeneration or regenerative practice. So within those principles, there's nothing we can actually accomplish if we don't actually develop ourselves as leaders. So the complement to the work you do is clearly how we build ourselves into effective leaders of regenerative practice. So that is another of the commitments of the course. And we'll be using not only my own regenerative leadership framework, but other tools and frameworks that I believe complement my own work and which I think you will find of very practical use and value in generating your own projects and your own successful outcomes for whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And that's why this last bullet here is the ability to acquire the knowledge, skills to design, lead, and manage successful regenerative projects in your organizations and communities. So the text we'll be using for the course is my own book, which you'll be getting for free, week by week, chapter by chapter, and we'll get to that later. So as I mentioned in the overview, there are two required assignments for the course in order for you to earn the certificate. The one is, first is that self-assessment of yourself as a sustainability leader or change agent or regenerative leader. And that is a downloadable questionnaire that you'll find in the overview of the course. That's in that general page, the first one. And at the end of that questionnaire, you're going to find a table. And that table actually comprises an action plan that I want you to complete and to send to me for feedback. Again, there are no wrong or right answers. These are just choices that you make based on your self-assessment in the questionnaire. For you to choose, I would recommend 1, 2, maybe 3 outcomes that you would like to see in yourself where you have scored yourself rather low. So if you scored out of 1 to 5, which is what the questionnaire rates you at, if you self-scored yourself on a 1 or a 2, maybe these are items in yourself that you'd like to work on, and it would be good to create this action plan, which I can then review and provide some feedback. And we can always meet and discuss via Zoom. So at any time, if you feel the need, just email me and we can schedule a meeting via Zoom. And please email me only the action plan table. I don't want to read your questionnaire. That is for your use and your purposes. I don't need to see that. I just need to see what it is that you've extracted from the assessment that you would like to work on for yourself. And I'll be focusing on different elements within that table to help you create something that you find really dynamic and helpful. The other assignment is the Regenerative Solution Project, which is the actual main assignment for the course, also necessary for you to earn the course certificate and obviously towards the Global Leadership Diploma. And I'll be giving you the outline of the project, and you can download that from also the general overview page of the course website. And there you'll find the whole structure of the paper. But of course, the topic that you will address is entirely your own choice. So you decide what it is that you're working on or want to work on, and you'll be sending me an outline of what it is that you want to accomplish. But I will be focusing most importantly on the design of the process, on the how you do what you want to do, not the what. I have nothing to say about what kind of work you do and what kind of industry you're in or what field you're in. But if I have any expertise, I can help you in designing the project and helping you to create those conversations with people in order to truly engage in the kinds of conversation that you need to engage in order to generate a truly regenerative project that can last for a long time and have a major impact. The other weekly assignment is the forum, the discussion forum, and that is required. And then the weekly reflective journal, which is optional, and this only comes to me. So if you want to do additional work or a topic you're working on and are really reflecting on and would like to share that with me, you can email me that journal each week, and I will be glad to read that and then provide feedback or to meet and discuss with you. So getting into the meat of the course, just to engender the kind of curiosity and commitment or engagement that we look for in this kind of work, is here are the two big questions I'd like you to ask yourself and to see that if you bring some of the answers to these questions to me and to the group, that we can work on these together in order for you to make the most and take away the best of the best that you can in order to build your own work. So question number one, which impact is it that you want to grow or want to see as a result of your work? That's question number one. And then of course, how can this course and obviously the Global Leadership Program help you accomplish this work, or the Social Innovation Diploma Program? How can we help you really be effective and successful? So these are the questions we will be trying to answer throughout the course, and hopefully you'll be bringing these up in the live sessions and in the forum discussion. And in order to sort of guide this, the first question for you, from me, is what is the most important concern that you have about your work, your organization, your community today? And of course, we continually talk here about issues that are environmentally impactful, or that are being impacted socially or economically. And in the end, these three are actually all brought together into what we call well-being for all living things, whether it's human or non-human. So can we consider all the different elements that make up what we do and not just limit ourselves to a narrow focus on a social problem that we want to solve and disregard other consequences? And we'll be getting into that more deeply as we get into the course. And so the second question, if you can identify what it is that really concerns you or you're interested in addressing or working on, why is this situation happening? And this is the key question, because we all have our own answers, our opinions, our own pet ideas about why things are happening and what the underlying causes are for why things are happening. But unless we work on those appropriately, we will not be able to address those problems. So this is the key question. And I'm not going to give you the answer now, but I want you to think about that, about what the underlying cause is for that challenge, that problem that you are most concerned or interested in, in your community, your organization, in your field of work. And then, as I say here, be prepared to share your ideas in the forum post, and then of course in the live session on the Fridays when we come together, because this is where we can really come together and share and build our understanding, our knowledge, and our skill as to how we can go about addressing the situations that we see are affecting us both locally and then globally. So in order to sort of ground ourselves in a vocabulary or language, here are two definitions that I think are important. One, of course, is sustainable development, and the other one is sustainability. And very often people use these interchangeably, and it's important to distinguish between the two, because sustainable development is actually a process. It's not an end point. So in the end, what we call sustainability is the result that we seek, so that we can carry on doing indefinitely forever, whatever it is that we're doing without negative impacts or consequences. But in order to get there, we need to put into place a process, which is sustainable development as the more conventional definition, or what some of us are now calling regenerative practice, regenerative leadership in my case, or regeneration. And so just something for you to think about. One of the, and I'll get to the definition of regeneration in a minute. One of the greatest reasons why we need to understand the importance of working towards sustainability is in this process that you see here on screen, which is what we call the Great Acceleration since the 1950s of human impact on everything, basically. So every human being and every human organization, every human system has accelerated its impact both on socioeconomic dimensions and Earth system dimensions. So on both social and actually planetary dimensions, we're having a hugely accelerated impact, which is increasing exponentially, as you can see, in all these curves that go from the 1950s into the 2000s, and now getting into the mid-2020s, in all of these different variables or factors. So economic factors like GDP, foreign direct investment, world population, of course, is increasing exponentially. And of course, that means that our consumption of natural resources is increasing exponentially. And therefore, we are having these increased impacts on our natural systems, all of which is unsustainable and requires us to think much more broadly about who we are, and what we do and how we do it. And you can read more about this in this particular paper, which is a dissertation. So if we go back to the history of some of these terms, all of us are familiar with the term sustainable development. And of course, because of a connection with the United Nations, it's important to actually place these terms within the context of the work of the United Nations, and of course here at AUPs. So sustainable development is actually coined as a term in 1987 by the Brundtland Report to the UN World Commission on Environment and Development, a paper that was called Our Common Future. And that's where we get this definition. And a lot of people say, well, tell me what sustainability is. And they say this. And actually, this is the definition of sustainable development, not sustainability. And the other key thing, this is a much longer document, and you can read it, and I have the link here if you want to. But two other key concepts emerged from the Brundtland Report, or this Our Common Future paper, which has to do with the social impact of environmental and social and economic aspects of human activity. And so these two concepts here came into being at this time when, whereas before, most of the focus on sustainability or sustainable development had to do with the environment, with the natural environment and in pollution and environmental degradation. Now we bring in these ideas of social needs. So the idea of the essential needs of the world's poor, how do we address those? And how do we give importance to these? And of course, now we get into the new frameworks in the year 2000 with the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, and then of course in 2015 with the new Sustainable Development Goals, the 16+1, which I'll talk about in a minute. The other major concept that emerged here that was discussed in this report was this notion of limitations, which had already been forecast many years before by Donella Meadows and her husband. But I'm not going to get into that topic, but you can explore that. This idea that technology and our social organizations, our corporations, our governments, our municipalities are pushing the limits of the natural boundaries, or what we call the carrying capacity of the planet, beyond the ability of the planet to generate the natural resources, the food, the water, and the air that we need in order to not only survive, but to thrive. And this was back in 1987. So today, many over 40 years later, it becoming clear that this was quite a predictive statement. And what do we do today in order to ensure that we do not continue to push the limits of the carrying capacity of the planet? So also briefly and historically, there are two main ideas which can be represented visually, like as we do here, in frameworks which we call the triple bottom line. And so many of you will be familiar with the terms triple bottom line as the sort of underpinning of sustainability. And this term was coined by John Elkington in the 1990s as the triple bottom line, where he talked about how it's fundamental for us to be able to see how we can integrate and overlap the natural environment, the social environment, and the economic environment in order to generate this sustainable possibility of or opportunity for development that can actually be long-lasting. Then in the years 2000, Peter Senge and his colleagues came up with a nested model. And again, this is not unique to him, but this idea of the nested system where the economy is the engine that drives everything, but it has to be clear that the economy is not its own thing, but it is embedded within society, and both of these, of course, are embedded within the planetary environment. So we cannot ignore the environment or society when we talk about the economy. And so those organizations that have a single bottom line, such as profit, and ignore the impacts of their industry, their activity on people's affluence or their wealth, and create the divide between the haves and the have-nots, or those who actually deplete natural resources and damage the environment, and of course the communities in where they actually throw out their toxic, very often toxic waste. These are no longer acceptable consequences of human activity. So these are two frameworks that I think are very important historically, and which many people use today. They are problematic, and we'll talk about that when we get together. But then we get to regeneration, and I'll be providing my own visual of that when we get into chapter 2 of my book next week, not this week. But here's a definition of regeneration. And regeneration is a term that we've chosen as something that goes beyond what has become a rather tired term, such as sustainability. Everybody thinks that they know what they mean and what that sustainability means, but they don't seem to get very excited about it anymore. And so in order to find something that can really engage us, we've adopted the term regeneration, and I've adopted the term regenerative leadership, because it has implications for how we lead in our organizations, our groups, our teams, our schools, wherever we may be. Now, the big thing, or the big difference of regeneration, it is not a human activity that focuses only on the outside or on our behaviors. And I'll get into more of that as we reach our discussions and our forums. And obviously when we get into the framework. But the whole point of my discovery of what was revealed in my own research and consulting work is the most effective leaders who call themselves regenerative leaders, they don't focus as much on people's behaviors as they do on their own and other people's consciousness. And obviously in the sustainability world, we speak about raising awareness, but this goes deeper and beyond that. When we talk about consciousness, we talk about something which has to do with how we see the world. And we cannot act in the world in a way that is entirely positive until we really see the world as it is, in its beauty, and of course with all its principles and the laws that operate in it and how they operate within these laws, and to see where we are situated with regard to those laws and how we need to operate in order to bring about a society that can be prosperous and can thrive forever without harming ourselves or other species, which brings in the vision for regenerative leaders. And this is what we call the triple top line as opposed to the triple bottom line. And this goes very simply like this: how can we grow prosperity, celebrate community, and enhance the health of all species for all time? So this is the challenge for all of us. And so if you persist in this course, we will be looking at ways of how we can do exactly that. And just to give you an appetizer of that, here's a visual, a very simple visual of how we need to think about regeneration. The first thing we need to do is we cannot just think about what we do. First, we need to redefine ourselves in who we are. If we're going to focus first on consciousness, something we don't do very well in education in our schools, before we can redesign what we do. So that takes us back to looking in the mirror at ourselves and our organizations to see who are we as individuals and as teams or organizations, in order to then see what we do and to be able to modify and amend what we do to bring it into line with the operational needs of the entire planet and our entire society. And this is what I call the work of regenerative leaders and their organizations. And one of the things, a couple of things that I'll leave you with this week is, one of the things that we might want to do is to change the focus and the tone we use when talking about this topic. In sustainability, very often sustainability leaders talk about the responsibility or the obligation, or all these different terms that tend to have a heaviness to them as terms themselves. They seem to have rather an inspiring effect. They seem to have a depressing effect on our intention, on our willingness to engage and to understand what it is that we can do. So rather than talking about limits or global issues which are very difficult to engage with, for example, if I were to say, well, in this course, we're going to solve global warming, that's not really possible. But we can work on what it is that we individuals, you and I, can do in our own backyard. And so the tone of the sustainability leader, what I am suggesting here, could be more positive. We actually translate that into similar terms, but on the regenerative side. So rather than talking about we are responsible, which we are, can we inspire people rather than making them morally responsible? Can we actually get them enthusiastic and excited about opportunities of what they can do as an individual? What can I do? Not what is the government not doing and will never do or should do. What can I do? Which opens up the idea of possibility. And this is the whole point of the project for this course. And of course, this can excite us and awaken our individual passion. And that's why we get into terms and obviously dimensions of ourselves, such as purpose and exploring our why. And if we can look at everything from the perspective of love rather than respect or dignity, maybe we can get deeper into what it really means to love ourselves and others in a way that actually builds us all up for a prosperous future where there is no longer any poverty, where all have the ability to live lives of purpose and meaning. And do we have faith in ourselves, and do we have faith in others? Do we believe in ourselves and each other? So can we make that work? And so here I'm going to throw in something a little more complex. Very often when people work in sustainability or sustainable development, they tend to focus very much on their mission, on their single goal, whether it's economic, social, or environmental. Unfortunately, that is short-sighted, because anything and everything we do has consequences and impacts on the other dimensions. And so what I'm proposing here is what we call a fractal model. And a fractal model looks something like this, where we can actually drill down into reality, into the micro level or into the macro level, in such a way that we can see that the laws of the universe operate equally, either in the microscopic or in the macroscopic level. And if we can actually approach the work of sustainable development from this perspective, we might find it easier to see how we can reconcile single bottom lines, such as just focusing on the economy or on ecology or on society, and actually bring us all together in this one integrated endeavor, which is whole well-being. And so when we look at this particular diagram, and it'll get simpler, even though it's a bit abstract, we have a look at, if we look at the three dimensions on this triangle of ecology or environment, economics, and equity or society, we see that people who are focusing exclusively on ecological or environmental terms, the question they ask themselves only is, are we obeying nature's laws? Everything else is less important. And so some of the themes that emerge from environmentalists or those who are focusing on the ecological are these. Whereas, for example, when we're looking at social and people who are focusing on very strong social missions, like poverty eradication, like ending exploitation, like ensuring a fair workplace. These are all social issues. And of course, we can ignore the environment. That can happen. And obviously, we might not consider the economics underpinning everything that we do economically when we look at equity. So the question that people in the equity space may ask themselves is, do people respect one another sufficiently and satisfactorily? And some of the themes that emerge from that side of the sustainability triangle is social justice, the problem of free trade, exploitation, union management. We are confrontational with business in order to ensure that we can defend the rights of those who do not have the power to exercise their rights, which again is one option, but not necessarily the best. On the economic side, when you're looking at only profit as your final motive, we can talk, the question that is asked is, how can we create a service or a product that can make money? And I don't care about it, we don't care about anything else. And some of the major terms here is everything is about money. And of course, this brings up the response, social responses over time in history, like Marx, obviously Engels, Mao, and obviously socialism, communism, and all of the responses to capitalism, which clearly is not working either. And where what we take care of are our shareholders rather than another group of people that I'll bring up now. So, and I hope you've been able to follow my train of thought here. What happens when we broaden the conversation and engage in actually seeing if we can't bring the different dimensions together? Well, if we can actually bring, for example, ecology and economics together as a concern, and businesses are seeing, many of companies like Nike or Walmart are seeing the writing on the wall that if they don't take care of natural resources, they're not going to last very much longer. So they must find a way to make their operating model, their business model, at least a double bottom line, if not triple. And so they begin to ask a question, is our ecological strategy profitable? So can we still make money and take care of the environment? And so we will see a continuum of their practices going from the worst to the best, which will look like this. Initially, everything was made, extracted and thrown out and thrown away in what we call the take, make, waste society. And the consumer society is an excellent example of that. But that's not good enough. And I can talk to you about authors who've worked on these concepts, who have then moved on to this notion of reduce, reuse, recycle, which is still not enough, but which is better. So the idea of becoming eco-efficient and doing better with our products. Then we're thinking about greening of the business, which also includes all we do, our purchasing, our buildings, our trucks, our vehicles, the chemicals we put in the ground. All of these begin to be the greening of the business, but it's also only environmental. We're not looking at the equity aspect here. Going beyond that and getting better, we get into cradle-to-cradle economics, which is quite simply, in nature, everything that is organic can be put into the ground again, allowed to decompose, and it can become food again. We need to get to the concept that we can do exactly the same thing with our industrial products and waste, that everything we make, in what Bill McDonough would say, the technical cycle, can we recycle and upcycle everything we make into new products that are just as good as the old ones? And that would be the idea of cradle to cradle, when nothing goes to the landfill. And this would bring on the industrial re-evolution, where we have to look at every product, every material, every substance that we make, which is synthetic, mostly based on fossil fuels, and how do we make those noble? It's so that they can be broken down, put back together again with no toxic waste. And that gets us to the eco-effective cycle rather than efficiency, where we are absolutely effective in nothing that we make, as in circular economics and circular industry, where one industry's waste becomes the nutrient or the food of the next industry. And if you can create a cycle around industries, then you can make sure that anything that comes into that industrial cycle is always turned out into something new and not thrown away to the landfill. So that's on that side of the equation. Now, what happens if we ask ourselves, can we be ecological and equitable? So how can we make sure this product or this service is going to affect future generations, and obviously the present generations, in terms of their health? So in the past, workers in factories, in agriculture, were exposed to toxic products. They were also exposed to the economic abuse and exploitation, but that's not addressed here. That's addressed here. So in response to this, if as a business person, I can think about the economics and also the social well-being and the environmental well-being of my workers, in the case of the environmental well-being, can we actually create buildings that are attractive, that generate a sense of well-being? But it's not all about just toxics or toxins in the water, in our products, the lead in the water, the carcinogens in our computers or in our paint. Can we also create products that are beautiful aesthetically, that actually create and generate a sense of well-being or pleasure or joy? So can we then impact the environmental and social health and well-being of all people? So finally, can we then balance or reconcile, or not only environment and equity, but also economics and equity? So what's the question here? Are men and women paid fairly and equally? So that's one question. Of course, there are many, but this is just one. And this brings into play things like corporate social responsibility, which you will have heard, or you might even have it as a value in your organization. We talk here of fair trade. And if you're in any of the developing countries or emerging countries where free trade has been, like in the United States and Central America with NAFTA, has been such a disastrous economic impact, do we actually commit and engage in fair trade versus free trade? Do we work on inclusion? Do we increase the diversity of our workforce? Do we therefore engage and incorporate people from different cultures, ethnicities, and races on an equal level? And rather than just managing our shareholders and responding to the profit bottom line and the quarterly report and the value of our stocks and shares, do we talk about stakeholder management, where we take care of not just of the people who invest money with us, but people whose lives depend on us, and people whose lives are only even indirectly affected by our industry or our products, but who may also be negatively affected if we don't consider them and their well-being. This is what we call externalities. So these are some of the things that we can talk about from a fractal perspective to see how, if we begin to broaden our perspective, we can actually begin to see how, no matter where we are in what our industry is or our activity, there are ways to make connections to other dimensions that we may not have considered before. So I know this is a bit long-winded, but I hope you'll have borne with me, and I'll be glad to discuss these in greater depth. And it is only when all these three come together that we can get to what I call the sweet spot here of sustainability, where if we can bring all of these considerations together, we can eliminate unanticipated consequences going forward. Of course, as I mentioned before, all of this can be brought under the umbrella of the 16 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which were brought out in 2015 and which will go on till 2030. And very importantly, and this is very important to regenerative leadership, this 17th goal, which is this notion of partnership. How do we come together in order to make all of these happen and work effectively and successfully? And that's part of our ongoing conversation as we meet over the next few days. So again, you can follow this and get more in-depth information on each of these goals from their website. And I hope you do, because your project will certainly connect to one more or many more of these, and it'd be good for you to be able to make those connections. So for this week, that is for week 1 of the course, I've placed these 3 videos in that page for week 1. You can choose to watch them all or just watch one of them that might actually catch your fancy in order to begin thinking about some of the implications of some of these big topics on the work that you do and how they might inform your project and obviously your growth or your development as a regenerative leader. Then we do require that forum discussion. So please answer the question that's there in the forum in week 1. And again, there is a topic here for personal reflection and a journal if you want to write it and send it to me. If you want to write it in Word, just email it to me. And here is my email. And this has 2 questions that I ask you to answer there. And of course, you can get into anything else. And then for next week, that is for week 2, in week 1, you'll be reading the introduction in chapter 1 of the book, which you will see there posted in the materials. There are other materials that I recommend that you browse if you have time and get into. Then for week 2, you'll be reading what is the core of the course, which is the chapter 2 of the book. And there will be a presentation on the Regenerative Leadership Framework, and that will be the core of the work that we'll be doing that next week. And to support that, please watch the TED Talk by Majora Katia on greening the ghetto. This is a TED Talk that she gave in, I think, in 2006, but it's still the most relevant video I can find that I've found on the topic of regenerative leaders and what they look like. And so I still use this video, and if anybody can find one that's better, more current, please get in touch with me. I'd love to actually replace this one. Yeah, do go through the other resources. and get on with the work. Feel free to reach out to me. If you have any questions, if anything's not working on the course site, let me know, and I'll be very glad to discuss with you at any time. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the course materials. I hope you think these ideas give you something to think about. Get in touch with me at any time, and have a great week.